Hey guys, this is Felix. Welcome back to InventBox, where the solution is just around the corner. Before we get too far into coding, I want us to take a step back and look at an overview of how Android development works. I want to make sure you understand some key concepts and terminology. Now, Android apps can be built using four basic components. These are activities, services, broadcast receivers, and content providers. An activity is roughly equivalent to a single screen. So you might have a list of contacts in a messenger that or a list of conversations, or you might have a screen that has a conversation with somebody, or an open camera. Those would all be activities. And an activity is a class, but they roughly correspond to one view. So an activity is basically a screen. And activities are independent of each other, but they can be connected to other activities and some of these other things through the layouts. Like you could have buttons or switches or different things like that. External apps can even start your activities if you give them permission. So an example of this would be when you click on the camera icon down here in a messaging app, and then it starts the camera activity from your camera app. The next thing is services. A service is basically like a background process. You could have a service for playing music in the background, maybe downloading an image, cleaning up junk files on your phone, something like that. And all of these things can happen regardless of what app the user is currently using, or even if the phone is asleep. But there are two main different kinds of services. Sometimes users care a lot about the reliability and the priority of the service running. For example, if your user is trying to play music in the background, then if their phone starts to become low on memory, your phone is going to try to kill some processes or at least delay them until it has more resources. So if it starts doing that and it decides to kill the play background music service, your user is not going to be very happy with that. Also, some of our services are important enough that we want to have notifications up in the status bar for them, like this right here. And sometimes you can even have action buttons in them. But then there are services that are not so important priority-wise. For example, cleaning up junk files on your phone. If the phone starts running out of RAM and it has to delay that, the user probably isn't even going to notice. And if they do, they probably won't care. So that type of service doesn't need high priority, and it doesn't need a status bar notification. So the main difference between the two types of processes are priority and does the phone try to keep them alive, or does it run like in the background where the user doesn't really care about it. Next, we have broadcast receivers. If you ever wondered how you received text messages even though your messaging app was not open, the answer is broadcast receivers. Essentially, they're a way to jumpstart an activity or service in your app without the app needing to be already running. And your app could also make broadcasts to let other apps know that some task is completed or something, and then those apps can do something with it. So you can use broadcasts to start apps that aren't running. Another example would be your alarm clock app. Chances are you set your alarm, but you don't leave your alarm app open. But sure enough, every morning, well, hopefully, your alarm does indeed ring, even though the app is not running. So that's from a broadcast receiver. And lastly, we have the content providers. Sometimes your app needs to store persistent data on your phone. So it's kind of like a database, but it's one layer abstracted from a database, and that lets us have control over permissions. So it's a more secure way of storing and retrieving the data. So you can have content providers be private just for your app, or you can even give access to other apps, and the content providers let us decide who can access our data. For example, when you download Facebook Messenger and it asks you if you want to import your contacts, what's happening is it's asking for permission to access your phone's contacts content provider. The cool thing is that any app can launch any part of any other app. And here's where the term intent comes in. If you're not familiar with the word intent, you will be soon. It is a very important term in Android app development. And this is one of the things that I really wish I understood better when I first started Android development. What is an intent? Well, basically an intent is just linking all of the different components inside your app and the different processes that it can run. So you might have your messaging app open to your buddy Chris, and you click on the camera icon, and that sends an intent to open the camera app. Now, why wouldn't it just say that it opens the camera app? Well, your app does not have permission to open other apps directly, and that's for security reasons. But the Android system is allowed to open other apps. So you have to tell your app to talk to the Android system and say, hey, Android system, I intend to open the camera. And then the Android system says, oh, okay, I can do that for you, and it opens the camera. So it's kind of a roundabout way of getting connections from one activity or service or something to another. But an intent is basically just one of these links. In fact, intents are how your app launches all of its activities. And that would include services and broadcast receivers. So you have an intent that tells it to open the camera, and then when they take a picture, it has an intent to go to this activity where you can confirm the picture. And if you click yes, then it sends an intent that transfers that information back to your messaging app, where then you can send another intent to get back to the main screen where it finally sends that image to your buddy Chris. And he can be super impressed with your Rubik's Cube collection. Now, intents are used to launch activities, services, and broadcast receivers, but not content providers. We use content resolvers for that. And we'll go into deeper detail about all of these different components as we start using them. But for now, I just want to make sure that you guys have a basic understanding of how Android apps are built and how each part connects to the others, and intents are a big part of that. If you have any questions, please leave them as a comment and stick around for the next video where we'll start talking about the development environment and the hierarchy and where to find everything.